Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution. So we have been in a series, as I've mentioned before, called Timeless Wisdom, as we're taking a look at some passages in our Bible and looking at them through practical, mystical, and metaphysical eyes. The title of this talk is Hurried and Worried, or Centered and Calm. And I hope you'll remember those words, and I hope you'll use them as a question that you keep gently in your mind throughout this week as you do whatever is on your to-do list and make whatever decisions you have to make, take whatever actions you have to take, to ask yourself, am I hurried and worried in this, or am I centered and calm? Certainly before COVID, I think it was very much an accurate statement for people in the United States to say that we were really tending toward living way overscheduled, stressed out, and frantic lives. Overscheduled, stressed out, and frantic lives. Now, during sheltering in place, that's kind of changed a lot of things, but as we're starting to get back in whatever back looks like for us, I'm noticing again that there's some of that stress and that being overscheduled and that franticness of what to do next and how to do it and so forth. And I want to ask you to think about people that you consider to be spiritually evolved. Think about, as you bring them into your awareness, and maybe you've seen pictures of them, or maybe you've attended lectures with them. What did they look like, and what did it feel like to you? I think of the time that I spent in India with a group of people from the Association for Global New Thought with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Think about that. I think about the times that I have sat and listened to teachers such as Eckhart Tolle or Thich Nhat Hanh or Ram Dass or Pema Chodron. And in these contemporary spiritual teachers and leaders, I witnessed and experienced a certain sense of calmness and centeredness and presence. So much so that as I would think about them, I found my soul saying, I want more of that. When I think of spiritual leaders and teachers that I aspire to and that I learn from, I don't see someone living a stressed out, frantic, overscheduled life. And so I think there's something for us to take a look at in how we live our lives and the price that we pay if we neglect the care and the nurturing of our souls, and if we neglect the care and nurturing of what really is important in life. Now, I said that in this series of Timeless Wisdom, we're going to be taking a look at some teachings from our Bible. And the one that I want to share with you this morning comes out of Jesus' life and ministry. And to me, it paints a beautiful picture of this topic and contrasts very much the idea of hurriedness and worriedness versus being more centered and calm. And so it comes from the Gospel of Luke, and it is about Jesus visiting with two sisters, Martha and Mary. Let me read it to you, and then we'll kind of unpack it and take a look at what's going on in the story. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. I love this
this story, this visual, I can see it. I can almost put myself in this situation, sometimes very much like Martha, and other times very, very much like Mary. A bit of context here, though. So Martha and Mary and their brother Lazarus were friends of Jesus. So it was like Jesus was going to the home of his friends. And in those days, it was, and I think it's still true today, part of Jewish culture is to really make welcome a visitor to your home, to extend a great deal of warmth and hospitality. And so Martha is doing exactly what is expected of her. She is wanting to entertain Jesus. She's wanting to prepare a meal, and so she does what's expected of her. Mary, on the other hand, is not doing what is expected of her. In fact, she's doing something quite extraordinary. She is acting more like a disciple than a woman. She is acting more like one who is wanting to learn from Jesus than one who is supposed to be preparing a meal for a visitor to the home. And that was not really an accepted place for Mary to be. Also in this story, we have Martha being very comfortable going direct. She's not too happy about what she's seeing because Martha knows the rules of the game. Martha knows that Mary should be in the kitchen with her, helping her, but instead her sister, through Martha's eyes probably, is taking the easy road out. She's just sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha is feeling left alone. But Martha goes directly to Jesus and says, shouldn't you tell her to come and help me prepare this meal? Help me in the kitchen. In so many ways, Jesus, and I think this is true really of most spiritual teachers, if not all, have a tendency to turn the conventions of their day, the normal accepted structure of their day, upside down and inside out. And he's saying, Martha, Martha. And the repeated use of her name is really kind of like he's chiding her, like, come on, Martha, Martha, Martha. You are worried and distracted about so many things. Mary has chosen the better part, and what she has chosen will not be taken away from her. I so wish that the gospel writer gave us what happened next. I would really like to know what Martha did when Jesus chided her and said, Mary has chosen the good part. You are distracted and worried about so much stuff. Did Martha kind of throw her towel down in a huff and leave the room and go back to the kitchen storming and upset? Or did she have a breakthrough moment? Did she understand what it was that Jesus was saying to her? Could she recognize the significance of what was happening right before her eyes, that her sister was making a very different choice? And her choice really wasn't to get out of work. Her choice was to seize the opportunity that was before her to learn from this teacher of consciousness. And so there's so much in this very short, very ordinary story that can be truly helpful to us today. There are teachable moments in the story, and we can grab those teachable moments because they can help us when we grab them and understand them and use them. They can help us to set our lives in order. So here's one of the first. Our choices are impacted by our ability to discern in any given moment what is truly most important. Let me say that again. Our choices are impacted by our ability to discern in any given moment what is truly most important, and then to act upon that, to be flexible and act upon that. Mary absolutely knew what was ordinarily expected of her. She knew that in an ordinary situation, she should be in the kitchen with Martha helping to prepare the meal. But she was able to discern in that moment what was more important. And what was more important was the opportunity to sit at the feet of a beloved teacher and to be inspired by and learn from him. Another teachable moment and insight in this story is the fact that our choices are shaped always by our values and by what we love. Think about that for a moment. Your choices in life, my choices in life, are shaped by what I value and by what I love. If I don't value something, if I don't love something, I'm not going to reorient my life around that. My choices are shaped by what I value and what I love. This is true, actually, for Martha and Mary. For you see, in Martha's case, Martha valued doing what was expected of her. Martha valued creating hospitality for Jesus. And there's nothing wrong with doing what is expected of us, what makes for a more civil and good situation or society. What does matter, though, is can we recognize that sometimes we need to change that just a little bit? That sometimes maybe we need to make a different choice. Sometimes we need to think about the situation a little bit differently. Martha could have chosen to still prepare something, but to make it more simple, right? And in the case of Mary, Mary saw the situation so differently. She was shaped by her friendship with Jesus, as I think Mary was too. Mary, shaped by her friendship, wanting to learn and to seize that opportunity, and Martha trying to find a way to make Jesus feel comfortable. So it wasn't, and this is such an important teachable moment, it wasn't what Martha was doing that Jesus pointed out to her as wrong, if you will. It was how she was doing it. How she was doing it, the energy that she had. It wasn't Martha's activity that Jesus was correcting, but what? Her worry and her distraction. Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. Mary has chosen the good part, and it will not be taken away from her. So it wasn't that Jesus was saying to her, don't fix a meal. He was saying to her, I believe, you got to put it in perspective. You are worried and distracted about so many things, about things in this moment that are not as important as others. He didn't tell her to stop preparing the meal. He did not tell her to stop preparing the meal. But he did say to her, go about doing it differently. That's very much like the quote that I shared with you earlier from Marianne Williamson. Everything we do is infused with the energy with which we do it. If we're frantic, life will be frantic. If we're peaceful, life will be peaceful. And so our goal in any situation becomes inner peace. The first part of that statement is incredibly important. Everything we do is infused with the energy with which we do it. If we're frantic, if we're worried, if we're afraid, if we're angry, if we're upset, if we're vengeful, everything we do is going to be infused with that energy. And so Jesus was saying to Martha, look at your energy. Keep that in check. You are distracted and you are worried. For centuries, this passage, I think, has been oversimplified to be interpreted as Martha represents the active life and Mary represents the contemplative life. And we could certainly compartmentalize it like that. But I think it's much more nuanced than that. Because even in the contemplative life, unless you are living in a monastery, you still have responsibilities, right? And even in a monastery, there are responsibilities, right? Chop wood, carry water, do the dishes, do it mindfully. So there's always the responsibility level of life, the active level of life, even if we simplify our lives greatly. So it's not necessarily about how many things we are doing, as it is about the inner quality of beingness in which we are doing it. There are people who can do a lot of things and handle a lot and still handle it with being centered most, if not all of the time. There are those who can handle very little and it doesn't take very much at all to knock them off their center. And so it is not about looking outward and judging another and saying, oh boy, this person is just like a Martha. It's about looking within, and that was something Jesus always pointed us back to, looking within ourselves and being first and foremost aware of what is the energy that we are bringing into any situation. We can take this not just in our personal lives, but we can take this and look out at the world and the situations that we care about in the world. Some of us are very much engaged in activism from a spiritual point of view now. We see things in the world, whether it is racism or any of the other injustices and inequities that we see around us, and we want to be engaged. And this is well and good, and it is necessary. But I would dare say that we need to be very mindful not only of what it is we are doing, but the energy with which we are doing it from. Are we doing it because we are standing with and for something beautiful and loving and kind, working really hard, but still standing in the energy of loving kindness and patience and compassion? Or are we doing what we are doing with anger? And while there are certainly things that we can look at around us that we say justify being angry, I would say that to whatever extent we can turn down the anger and turn up the action and turn up the compassion as we engage, we will bring about a much better end result. This is true whether we are talking about something that is a social issue, or we're talking about how we are in our homes or in our workplaces. It's not an either or. It's not an either or. It's a both and. And to get there requires discernment, requires recognizing what really matters. The way we say that in one word is priorities. And it's about flexibility. How many times has there been something that has come up in your life that you knew needed your heart, you knew needed your attention, and you had to set aside everything else that you thought that day was going to include? To be like Mary and choose the better thing, to be there for that person who needed you in that moment. They weren't on your calendar, but you knew that they needed you in that moment, that you had to discern what it was that was truly important. To me, this very short, very commonplace event that Jesus was describing is so rich in teachable moments to us. And I think it also points to the longing of our souls for a relationship with God or the divine or the universe, whatever, your higher power. I quite frankly don't care what you call it, and I know that it doesn't care what you call it. But there is a longing that I believe we all have a relationship with that, to recognize that, to feel connected to that, even if we don't know how to articulate it. Even if our way of connecting may be a very different path than the faith origin we grew up in, the how is not so important in this case. It is the what, it is the desire, it is the yearning of the soul to connect, and I'm going to use the God word, to connect with God. And that's another piece of what Mary is really representing. And I think it is in part what Jesus was speaking to when he said, Martha, Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her. I think that every time we allow ourselves to turn toward that which feeds our souls, that we then turn back and re-enter into our life, more centered, more solid, more compassionate, and wiser. I invite you to let this example live in your mind this week. As you deal with whatever is up for you this week, if there are big changes for you at work or big changes at home because of kids and school, whatever's going on, let this example live in you as a real life teaching tool. And let that question that I shared with you at the beginning of the message live in your mind and heart as you ask yourself, am I hurried and worried, or am I centered and calm? And as you notice your answer to that question, if you notice, hey, I'm really very hurried and worried here, try not to judge yourself. You can name something without judging yourself or beating yourself up for noticing what you notice. Name it, but then see if there's one thing you can do to kind of dial that back down a bit. And maybe it's just taking a few deep breaths. Maybe it's just getting up from your chair in your office and walking around for a moment. Maybe it's closing your eyes and bringing to mind 3 things you're grateful for. Maybe it's closing your eyes and bringing to mind the image of a spiritual teacher that you know would not be living their life in that moment hurried and worried, but would instead be centered and calm. These are simple things we can do, but these simple things really do work. So as you go throughout this week, may you live within the context of the question, am I hurried and worried or centered and calm? Namaste.